Hey everyone, welcome back to Dasker Discusses. Today I'm going to do something a lot different. Today I'm not going to give you a review on a TV show or a movie or even my, impersonations. No, today I'm going to talk about something that a lot of my students discuss with me as well, and I'm going to call it The Things I Miss About Watching Movies, Part 1. Let's do this. Now I get a lot of students talking about DVDs, Blu-rays, Netflix, everything. We talk about the changing shift of how we watch movies and TV shows, right? And they're always fascinated about the past and about how did we watch things back then? They ask me questions like, Mr. D, when you saw that movie, where did you watch it? And I'm like, well, I actually got that on, borrowed it on tape, or I went to the movies and I watched it, it was a bit different. Obviously, movies are still around, cinema's still around, but going to the actual video shop. Now that's what we're going to talk about. The things that I miss about watching movies, part 1, this is my part 1, is the whole thing about the video shop. Now, put it this way, born in the early 80s, and then going to the video shop, when I was probably 7, 8, 9 onwards, it was this thing, this cultural kind of thing you did, and on a weekly thing I did, and I came from my family were big movie buffs, right? So you'd go to the video shop and you just walk around scanning around, and everything was put into the genres like action, comedy, new releases, whatever, horror as well. And there was this thing about that, there was this feeling you had about going to the video shop. Now, how do you explain it? If you were alive back in those days, you'd understand what I'm talking about. Whether it was a Blockbuster or here in Australia we had Video Easy. I had this particular video shop that was just, its own kind of franchise. It was not even a franchise, just one store where I lived in, the outskirts of Melbourne. And there was something about walking in this small kind of shop and everything was all there. You had all the tapes out on the racks there, all the different genres, and there was that deal, it was like $5 for 5 weeklies, so you go on the school holidays and you go walk in, and there was something about going in, you're like, okay, cool, I've got 5 weeklies to choose from, here we go, what are we gonna do? Now the thing is, even as a young kid, say 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, I wasn't just into, all the, typical, cartoon movies and kids movies and all that. I was like a big action junkie back then, and a lot of people were. I'm talking about things like the go-to movies in the action or even the martial arts kind of section, Bloodsport, Kickboxer, Enter the Dragon, Way of the Dragon, The Big Boss, Fists of Fury, Bruce Lee movies, Jean-Claude Van Damme movies, Stallone, Schwarzenegger, Total Recall, Predator. There's all these great action movies that you'd go to, you'd be like, yep, I'm definitely borrowing Enter the Dragon. And what would be really cool would be like, I'm gonna borrow Enter the Dragon, even though it's been on TV a few times and I've taped it, I'm watching the uncut version. And that's the thing about that we kind of take for granted now, that there's not many films that are cut or censored that much, but back then on TV, there was a lot of things that were cut. I remember all the time you'd have on TV the Nightmare on Elm Street series 1, 2, and 3 would play throughout one night on a Friday night, and I'd stay up all night with my brother and we'd sit there and tape them and get rid of the commercials and all that, but it'd be censored. Now the thing is, you get a lot of people thinking, wow, you watched Freddy Krueger back then? Yeah, look, the famous story of me and friends and family know that, my cousins ended up watching Nightmare on Elm Street Part 1, and I was probably 5 or 6 years old. Now I don't remember a thing about it, but apparently I was in the room watching it. I don't remember a thing, but I do remember when I was probably about 10, 11, when you've got an older brother who borrows these movies as well, he's got mates over, you sneak it in and you're like, yep, I'm gonna watch Freddy Krueger Part 1. The thing is though, I think we were more, not desensitized to it, but it was a bit different in terms of watching really a scary horror movie or really violent kind of action flick, like Total Recall, for example. Seeing that when you're really young, back then it's like, okay, cool, it's violent, but now, you wouldn't really want to show that to your 10-year-old nephew or something like that, because it is pretty full on. Same as Commando. Commando, Schwarzenegger has so many good one-liners, but extremely violent. Rambo as well. All these action films. But when you get to horror, there was something about the horror films like, Child's Play or Nightmare on Elm Street or the original Halloween. And then you had ones like funny horror movies like Shocker or Puppet Master, for example, which were, more like comedy, dark comedy in a way, kind of quite creepy. But the thing was though, when you had parents or, with your parents as well, you'd think, okay, you can borrow all this, you can borrow that, but there were some movies that were just unattainable that I wasn't allowed to borrow. So, e.g., The Exorcist, for example. Now, walking through the horror aisle and you'd go and have a look, you'd be like, go to movies with, Freddy movies or Jason movies or Child's Play or whatever, but it was always looking at that cover of The Exorcist, which was something really creepy about it. I'll put a picture of it here. This is the one I remember, roughly. There was something really weird about it, and obviously in primary school and getting into high school, there was the stories behind it about someone watched it and they died or blah blah blah. Typical, schoolyard rumors that didn't really make sense, right? And there was heaps of things like that for a lot of movies, but I remember, The Exorcist, something that I was never allowed to borrow, only from when I was probably 14, 15, that someone in the household managed to borrow it, and I took it and I went to a friend's house and we watched it. And again, it was during the day, and there was some bits that, really freaked me out. But before I get into that, there was a grade 6 party that I went to where someone had borrowed it, and we watched it, and it did kind of affect me in a lot of ways as well. I was really creeped out and I couldn't sleep for at least a week, I remember. But again, it was dribs and drabs and like flashes of, weird faces and stuff like that, which I didn't really understand. Now, looking back, probably not the best idea to have watched that at that party. But again, in the 90s, it was like seen as really not, it was a big deal, but not as a big a deal as it is now. The thing is though, watching it later on in my teens, I'm like, yes, I can understand how this is scary, and I can understand how it affected people, but I was more by the cinematography of The Exorcist as well. But we won't get into that, we'll talk about that another time. What I'm trying to say is that whole process of going to the video shop, you get your membership card, trying to pick the correct movies. There was that process of picking it up and like looking at the cover and not judging it by its cover, reading the back of it as well, but finding these gem movies that you never would have found as a teenager back then. And I'm talking about things like even What's Eating Gilbert Grape, something like that, or like later on in my as I was getting older, Requiem for a Dream. That was like I was about 17 when I saw that. The cover of it was like, whoa, it looks interesting, and then when you watch it, it's like mind-blowing kind of thing. But there were like certain gems that you would find, like films that you'd find that you'd probably have never known existed, because they weren't on TV and you didn't really know that they existed. So for example, I'm talking about one of my favorite movies of all time called Blood In, Blood Out. Here's the cover here. An epic 3-hour story about two brothers and a cousin, and the whole East LA Mexican kind of gang warfare that happens, and all the stories that happen from those three characters. You'd never know. And other things like, it's not only that, it was like, I'm not saying, the good old days, whatever. No, it's more like it was simpler times in terms of you go there, you borrow something, you come back, you watch it as a family, and it was like a certain like really nice feeling about that. Whereas now, I get it, we've got access to everything and we've got whatever we want to watch, whenever we want to watch it, phone, etc, etc. David Lynch said it perfect. There's a clip where he talks about watching a film on an iPhone. I'll put the link in the description. And how it's just not the same, and I agree with that. And even VHS, I get it, watching something like Freddy Krueger or whatever, going into the horror section, picking something out, watching it on VHS, and it was quite grainy. Even something like Evil Dead, I remember that cover was creepy as, but watching Evil Dead on VHS, the grainy texture, it had been watched so many times, it was a bit fuzzy, and you're like, wow, this is really creepy. And then you re-watch it again on Blu-ray, and it's still, it holds up, that movie. It's quite hilarious as well. It's gross, but being so clean and crisp, there is just something about it that it loses its traditional kind of feel of when you saw it as a kid. I get it, things have changed, whatever, but I just thought I'd add that in there. And what I tell my students is that they've kind of like, they've missed out on that whole aspect of going somewhere, borrowing it, that whole feeling, whereas now they just click on something and they just watch it. So I do feel for them, and I think that whole concept of going somewhere, physically touching, the tape, or even, when it got into DVDs as well. But now you don't see these shops a lot. But back then it was like grabbing the tape, going home, putting it on with your family or your friends, your cousins, whatever. There was that whole thing that you did with this whole, what's that word? Kind of like a ceremony of like getting the popcorn, getting the drinks, getting the snacks, putting the tape in, getting ready to watch something that you borrowed that, one, you've heard that someone said it was good, or one, that it was at cinema and you want to watch it again, or you didn't get to see it at cinema, or two, that, it was like going to be an awesome action or horror movie. It was that whole tradition of doing that is lost now. How is it lost? Well, you've got your Netflix and Stan and Hulu and Amazon and Apple or whatever and HBO, etc. The only thing about that is that you've got access to all these movies and there's so much stuff on that you end up watching so many different TV shows and bits and pieces of things where someone recommends a movie and says, go watch, the new Netflix movie, go watch The Five Bloods, which I still haven't watched, by the way, or, Stranger Things, which is great. And then you end up watching it bang, 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 all in one go. Obviously, the way things have changed, that's the way the audience is now, and that's the way we are. We want things on demand, etc. We can watch whatever we want, however we want, even on your mobile phone. Now, back in the day, the 90s, there was no concept of that. It was like VHS, and that was it. You needed a VCR, you needed a TV, done, right? Then you get into the whole thing about, laptops and DVDs. We won't talk about that. I'm talking about specifically about going to the video shop. There is that whole feeling that has kind of like left us as a whole, where you can still enjoy good movie and good TV shows, but I get that, not having to go to the video shop is, big deal. You just stream it, which is really convenient. But I do miss that fact, and that's what this video is about. It's about what I miss about movies. Now that's to say that, Blu-rays, I still buy a lot of Blu-rays as well, because I like that whole thing about watching the making of and the commentary. That's all good, and people still do it. There's still people on Instagram that I follow that have got huge Blu-ray collections and VHS collections as well. But I think to the general population and friends as well is that, it's convenient, chuck it on Netflix, I'll chuck it on pay TV or HBO, whatever, and that's it, done with it. I really enjoyed the time when, Game of Thrones was that whole once a week kind of schedule that it had, where it'd come out in America, then here it'd be on a Monday night and we'd all watch it at the same time, or Monday day, just say. You watch it at the same time and the next day talk about it. That stuff is still good. That stuff is awesome, and it kind of like reminds me of a time of back then with tapes, okay? Or when something big was on TV, like, for example, the Michael Jackson Black or White clip. That was like, at the same time all over the world it all came out. And I think this conversation isn't just about VHS and going to a video shop, but do you reckon that we've kind of like missed that whole thing where there's like a global kind of event for like a movie, not a movie, like a music clip like Michael Jackson had back in the day? Let me know in the comments. But let me know what you thought about and what your experiences were about going to the video shop, and what were the go-to movies you used to borrow as a kid, if you grew up in the 90s, just say. And let's not forget the ethical situation you found yourself in. After watching the movie, you take it out of the VCR. Well, hey, hang on. Have you rewound it? Be kind, rewind. Just like that movie. You have to rewind the tape. DVDs, you just take it out, whatever, but the physical tape had to be rewound. And in some video stores, you actually got fined for not doing it. But you're like, oh, they got rewinding machines, just let them do them. You had to rewind the tape. Don't be one of those people. I used to rewind. Be kind and rewind. Talking about streaming and piracy and people doing all that, but back then I remember one specific story. I had an uncle that came back from overseas, and he had a bootleg version of Jurassic Park with, I think it was Chinese or Japanese subtitles on the bottom, and it was a bit fuzzy, but this was at the time when Jurassic Park was still at the cinema, and I had watched it and got my hands on it and made a copy of it. Naughty naughty, or my dad made a copy of it, just say. And watching Jurassic Park, even though it was so fuzzy with subtitles as well, it was pretty much the most popular kid on the block, I could say, for sure. So there are things like that that just you forget about, but then when you think, you're like, wow, yeah, I had a copy of Jurassic Park while I was at the cinema. It's pretty epic. And it was funny back in the day getting those tapes and then seeing the warnings that came up. Have you got what you paid for? And have you been struck by a video pirate? And then obviously DVDs came out, and you go to every kind of Sunday market or boot sale, whatever, and there's fake DVDs and there's burnt DVDs, and it just exploded. But talking about, let me know what you thought in the comments about this video, but also your memories of going to the video shop, and what are your favorite memories of that particular point in time where we're kind of lost forever in a way. And of course, if you like this video, guys, let me know what you thought in the comments below about the video and about your experiences with renting movies and what you miss about watching movies as well. Comment, and if you want to subscribe and keep up to date with my uploads, please do so. Hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you guys in the next episode of Dasker Discusses.